That's all right. Hello, Abigail. Hello, Lucy. Thank you both for joining us. Welcome to our bookshop in Tring. I say our bookshop. It's obviously I'm at home at the moment, but in fact, Lucy's closer to the bookshop than I am. You're between here and it's a 400-yard walk to the shop. But and Abigail, you're zooming in from Forest Hill. You tell me.
Yep, Forest Hill in South London. That's right.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the audience who you're going to be a big part tonight. You're reliant on you to be supplying us some great questions, certainly for the second half of the event. I'm going to hand you over to Lucy in a moment just to sort of get a gist of this wonderful book and get loads of brilliant bits and pieces out of Abigail. There's a chat function. So have a look at the bottom. You can see there's a chat function. There's also a Q&A function. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on both of them. I'm going to be sending you some messages. Please do submit your questions, and we'll get a bit of banter going on in the second half. But without further ado, can I hand over to the brilliant Lucy?
Thanks, Ben, and Abigail. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know you're not here in person, but I promise we're nice. Welcome to our bookshop. Welcome to Tring, and you're here tonight to talk to us about your debut novel, which is Girl A, which I have a copy of here.
I feel I always have one at my side now, which is really nice. It sits on the sofa next to me, and my husband's like, "What are you doing? Put it away."
Yes, we are here to talk about that. Now, you launched in the UK in January of this year, and already you have been billed as a global bestseller. You have been called the biggest literary fiction voice of 2021. And I gather that Sony have just acquired the rights. Now, I personally couldn't put the book down. And clearly, from those sorts of reviews, there are a lot of people in agreement with me. So, I mean, wow, what a start to 2021. So could you just talk us through, I mean, what has life been like since the launch?
It's really strange because I think it feels sort of like everything has changed, and you know, the fact that the book is out there and is being enjoyed by readers, and it is kind of the dream come true. Like, that's what I've wanted since I was very, very little. And so that feels like a kind of, you know, almost monumentous thing, like personally, to have people, you know, having their views on the characters and having different interpretations of the story. But I think the strange thing is it also feels like very little has changed. And I think maybe some of that is publishing in lockdown means there is some degree of kind of separation, and you maybe don't get to kind of meet readers in person and meet booksellers and say the kind of thank yous that you want to say. But I think that's coming, and events like this kind of help to bridge the gap massively, and kind of give you the sense that actually, you know, it is totally wonderful what has happened, and yeah, kind of make it extra surreal, I guess.
Have you had that moment? I know it's been difficult because shops have been closed, and have you actually seen your book in a bookshop yet?
Yes, I have. I went to sign some books in London the other day in Goldsborough Books, and I did get to sort of see Girl A lining the shelves. It was actually slightly artificial because I probably saw it was like sort of like 200 copies of it lining the shelves, because as I was kind of signing them, we were kind of adding them to the shelves. So I don't personally expect like every bookshop to stock 200 copies of Girl A, but so that was perhaps a kind of particularly skewed sort of spotting of it in a bookshop, but really lovely at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, seeing all the like yellow spines, and I think also just sort of seeing my book alongside kind of other books that I have loved is still very, very strange. Like I'm still not kind of, used to that at all, and that I think it is just incredible. And you know, I've loved kind of bookshops and reading for as long as I can remember, so to sort of even have something kind of physical alongside, you know, so many other kind of great books is just very, very cool.
And so on that, you say as long as you can remember you've loved bookshops and reading. Now I gather you either are or were a lawyer with Google before launching this. So you have clearly led a very varied life and career. So, I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit about your past and what's led you to being here today?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And yeah, Lucy, I'm still a lawyer at Google. So still doing that like Monday to Friday, and kind of advising clients on, you know, well, advising Google on various things. So I think yeah, that can actually be quite stressful, like maybe more stressful than than writing in some ways. Definitely some days. So I think that, you know, I really wanted to write ever since I was a kid, and I spent a lot of time as a teenager writing, and as a child. I have a very vivid memory of kind of getting up early before school when I was sort of like 9 or 10, and working on my like epic fan fiction pieces on my parents' really like clunky desktop. I mean, it was like, you know, the sort of first generation of home computers, and I would kind of like try to write before school, and so it was always this kind of real dream, I guess. And what I think is sort of quite difficult to acknowledge looking back for me is I think I basically gave up very, very quickly on that being a dream. I I kind of, as I was, you know, sort of my late teenage years, I remember sending out a kind of a manuscript, pretty awful manuscript, to agents, and, you know, obviously just getting kind of a blanket set of rejections. And I don't know if it was that, or if it was kind of just getting older and a bit more cynical, as happens. But writing just seemed to me kind of to be a bit of a pipe dream, to be honest. And I think I kind of graduated from university feeling that, you know, now was the time to do something much more sensible, and much more secure in a way, kind of financially secure and sort of clear in having a progression, and sort of certain in a way. So I went into law in my early 20s, and for the rest of my 20s, to be honest, I was pretty submerged by it. I worked in law firms, and that lifestyle I found kind of very, very all-encompassing. So it was a case that, you know, you work until 2 a.m. and you kind of have to fly, you know, to negotiate a contract at, you know, sort of like in the next day. And it's kind of like the life in a way that Lex leads in Girl A. But whereas she, I think, is brilliant at it, and thrives on it, and actually finds kind of great comfort in it, I was the opposite, and I just really struggled, and I didn't write at all. You know, I sort of really missed having some normality and routine. And I think it was kind of that it was the sort of culmination of that, and becoming quite unhappy, I think, ultimately. That kind of combined with a revelation, or realization, that I'd totally given up this thing that I love doing, writing, that sort of forced me to kind of have a bit of a sort of pre-30th birthday analysis of where things were, and just think, actually, I'm gonna quit my job, and I am going to give this a shot, and at least try writing something. You know, that was kind of the deal I had with myself. I'd take 3 months off between jobs, and I would write, and I'd write every day. That was sort of the bargain that I think I made with myself, and that was how I started writing Girl A.
And so to Girl A, it is the story, as we've said, of Lex. It's a story, I would say, of survival. It's a story of what comes next. And I think overarchingly, it's a story of hope. So, I mean, without giving too many spoilers away, could you talk us through, if someone was picking it up tonight to read for the first time, what could they expect from it, from the plot?
Yeah, Girl A is, so the Girl A of the title is Lex, Lex Gracie. And when Lex is a child, she manages to escape from her family home, which gradually becomes known as the House of Horrors in the press. And when she does, she frees her 6 brothers and sisters, and she exposes her parents' crimes that they have been kind of committing under a religious guise within the house. And when you kind of open Girl A, it actually starts 15 years after that escape. And by that time, Lex is living in New York. She is a successful attorney. She does everything she can really to avoid thinking about her past altogether, until her mother dies in prison. And when she does, she leaves Lex and Lex's siblings the family home, so the House of Horrors, where they grew up, and where they suffered kind of a traumatic childhood. And that's what forces Lex to kind of return to the UK, and to reconnect with her brothers and sisters to decide the fate of the house. And I think it's in that kind of the reconnecting as a family, that the kind of the hope of the book is found, because I think, kind of might pick it up and think, oh, is this going to be a really, really dark story? And I think in some ways it is, but exactly as you said, Lucy, I think in the human relationships and the bonds between Lex and her siblings that are being kind of forged in this shared childhood, there's also a huge amount of strength and hope and love there as well.
Yeah, it's a book where I think it's less about what took place and it's more about what comes next. So if to Lex and her siblings, it's about how they move on from that. It's almost, we've all seen these stories, haven't we, in the papers, in the press, but it's actually what happens when the media moves on to the next story, and you're still there, you're still surviving, you're still living, and actually this is their story of how they do exactly that.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was always interested in that, in terms of kind of, I'm quite interested in true crime and have watched a lot of the kind of documentaries and listened to the podcasts that have generated a lot of media attention and interest. And I think I was always kind of interested in terms of what happens next beyond the headline, or the photographs that kind of gain a really strange, almost notorious kind of reputation. It feels like there must be so much that goes on that we never do see, and that we rightfully don't see. But I think it's also a really kind of interesting time for the people who've been affected, and it's probably, it is the place where you find the hope in how they've each coped, or failed to cope in some cases with what's taken place.
And so is that where the idea came from? Was it true crime? Was it podcasts? Was it fiction? Was there a particular story from the past that you had in mind? Where did it draw together from?
Yeah, there was definitely, it was definitely true crime was an influence. And I think particularly, a few crimes which have involved kind of children and teenagers. And it feels like, that happens so early on, in kind of one's life. And I think, you would become, slightly defined by it, in the way that Lex and her siblings are known by their pseudonyms in the press or in the court documents, you know, that she is kind of girl A, and almost becomes kind of defined by that. And in these particular cases, I think I was just really interested in imagining how, you know, how different characters, different people would react to that kind of definition. You know, if in the case of, you know, some of Lex's siblings, they almost embrace that identity, and they in some cases kind of can manipulate the attention that the case has had to their own advantage. Whereas I think that for Lex, she kind of wants anything but to be defined purely by these particular events, and she kind of almost wants to forge an entirely new identity, anything but girl A, in a way. So yeah, I think that was a real kind of source of inspiration, and sort of a question that I was interested in was kind of what does happen in the months and the years that follow an event like this.
And in the book itself, I mean, I was fascinated because there's a lot of characters that are introduced, but there's a lot of relationship dynamics going on there. So you've got Lex and her relationship with her siblings, and then their relationships. But you've also got her relationship with her mother. You've got her relationship with the house, really, which is almost like a character in the way you bring it to life and talk about it. It's almost like that's a relationship with Lex. Then you've got with JP, with her psychiatrist. Which of those do you think for you is the most significant?
It's a really interesting question. I think I would probably say that Lex's relationships with her siblings are the sort of heart of the novel, and Lex kind of wants to sort of turn the house of horrors into a sort of community centre, into something really good and positive. And I think that her interactions with her siblings to kind of get permission to do this, they, to me, I guess, are probably the most defining relationships in the book. And I think some of that is because they're relationships that we see right from the kind of very beginning. So we see the kind of Gracie family as children of kind of 6 or 7, right up until the adulthood. And I think that the sort of the way that the dynamics have shifted, or the way that the dynamics have sort of tragically sort of stayed entrenched, and that they can't escape from the kind of dynamics they had as children. I found that the most kind of fascinating, the most fascinating kind of relationships to write in Girl A. And I think another point is that they're just such different relationships. So the relationship Lex has with her younger sister Evie is kind of incredibly tender, and Lex is incredibly protective over Evie. You know, they share the same room in the house, and that kind of bonds them together. Versus kind of Lex's incredibly caustic relationships with her older brother Ethan, with her younger sister Delilah, where there's kind of genuine like resentment and really kind of old ghosts like haunting those relationships.
Do you have siblings, or are you an only child? Or
I'm an only child. Yeah. So I think maybe that's why I sort of put such kind of, maybe that's why I have such fascination with kind of these sibling dynamics, and, you know, kind of why I answered in terms of those being the defining relationships in the book, is because I was really interested in those relationships, and I think I have been ever since I was kind of quite little. Yeah, I was always interested in kind of big families, in fiction, like from the Marches in Little Women to like the Weasleys in Harry Potter. I think, I kind of wanted to be maybe a part of kind of a bigger family, and was always interested in what those, in a way, how those connections work, because I'd see friends and their siblings, and sometimes they would absolutely like loathe each other on a particular day, but at the same time I got the impression they would defend one another like to the death against anybody else, like anyone outside the family, and that just seems so interesting to me, and so kind of, I think I was kind of envious and fascinated at the same time, with that strange kind of bond that you can have there.
Yeah, there's I loved you mentioned Lex's relationship with Evie. I loved that. For me, I think that was one of my favorite relationships, and there's a conversation they have in it, and it haunted me for days. They say they're talking about what their alternate life may have looked like, and I think it's Evie says, do you think they know how lucky they are? So they're looking at themselves in what their life could have been. And she says, do you think they know how lucky they are? And Lex says, no, I don't think they do. And she says, shall we tell them? And Lex says, no, let them be. And it was that line, let them be, that really hit me, because I thought, you've so cleverly drawn out there that actually the luckiest of people are those that don't realize they're lucky, because they are just living life without any concept of what it would mean to be lucky. And yeah, I thought it was such a lovely relationship, and just in such a simple conversation you managed to get such a phenomenal point across. It was amazing.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That means the world to me. Thank you. Yeah, it's a conversation that I kind of remember writing, and yeah, one of those that you kind of almost moved by as you're doing it. So that thank you.
Which of the characters, I know we've talked about Lex, and there might be a degree of her with her high-flying lifestyle that was modeled on perhaps your past, but which of those characters is the one that you felt closest to, that you identified with? Because there are a lot of characters introduced. Which of them for you was the one you felt closest to?
I mean, I think apart from Lex, and I feel obviously sort of a massive attachment to her, having spent such a long time kind of, so I've spent such a long time with her, and sort of thinking about her, that it's sort of hard to disconnect from that. I think that in a way I have sort of most, I probably spend longest sort of thinking and mulling over Dr. K, who is Lex's psychologist.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that one.
Yeah, who she's kind of worked with Lex ever since Lex was kind of escaped from the house. And I think that she is just somebody who is a really kind of, I think she's a very kind of conflicted character, and a character who's kind of hugely benefited Lex. She's, you get the impression she's dedicated a lot of her career to almost trying to make Lex better, and to help her recover from what happened in the House of Horrors. But she's also a character who I think has her own motivations, and is very kind of concerned with her own success. And I think that I kind of have a lot of sympathy for her in a way, and I'm sure different readers will have very, very different reactions to her kind of through the course of the book. But I don't know, I think maybe it's the sort of really fine line between her being kind of deeply caring and invested, versus her being kind of ambitious, and kind of controlling in a particular way. And I think I have some sympathy for those kind of conflicting emotions. I think kind of, often career-wise, those are things that do come up for maybe each one of us. There are kind of conflicts around that. So she is probably the character who I'm not sure if I would almost say affinity so much as just kind of fascination. And I think even having kind of spent a lot of time writing her scenes, and I'm not sure how I feel about her. And I think to me, that's in a way the sign of having created a character that I'm really happy with, and that feels quite kind of human in a way, because they're not straightforward.
With Lex, what I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to ask if it was intentional, or if it was just something that had happened without you thinking. There's no physical description of her in any of the book. Was that intentional, or was it just that it didn't feel right as you were writing?
It was intentional to some degree, yeah. I don't know. I kind of find it quite frustrating in books, and especially kind of books that have female kind of key female characters, for there to be a massive amount of kind of attention on sort of how they look. Like I guess in a way, I almost don't find it kind of particularly defining or particularly sort of relevant in some ways. And I think particularly in Girl A, there's this idea that Lex has kind of fought for her privacy, and for her kind of I mean, I guess she's been given an anonymity in particular ways, but I feel she's kind of fought to have a life where she's not defined by media attention or by these photographs that kind of haunt her, that still are available on the internet, of the kind of childhood photographs from within the house. So maybe I also sort of slightly felt that an absence of description sort of finally afforded Lex the sort of freedom that she's kind of hoping for, as well. And I hope that's the case. Yeah, so I think it was a kind of combination of my own maybe kind of slight irritation at times with real focus on female characters' appearance, and also sort of on a more personal level for Lex, that yeah, I think that in a way she's somebody who is liberated by being anonymous, and by not being known anymore.
Oh, I think that's lovely. And you've made Sony's life very straightforward, because no definite casting for it, will there?
It's open book. They can go crazy.
So with the plot, how do you sit down? So you say you're inspired by true crime, but you've sat down. This is your first novel. I mean, do you have the plot in mind? Do you sit and let the plot find you? Which way do you go about it to even start to put this together?
It was quite a kind of mix of planning and winging it. I think there's generally an idea that writers are one or the other, like kind of they plot, or they kind of go fly by the seat of their pants. I think I'm probably somewhere in between those two things. So I really wanted to know how the story would end, but before I started it. And that was the case. Like I had a pretty clear idea of what the final scene would kind of entail, but before starting. And I had a pretty clear idea of a few of the siblings. So of Ethan and Evie and Delilah were kind of quite well drawn, all of who are kind of really key characters. But there was still kind of really big gaps in it. So I feel like I knew I wanted the novel to end, but I had a lot of uncertainty about how everybody would get there and what they would look like, when they did, by the time they did get there. And I kind of I sort of work in a massive document, and as I go, I feel like the plan kind of develops. So I kind of write into the plan, and sort of fill it in, essentially. And I think that kind of enables you that as you go and as you're writing, you can look ahead and kind of add snippets to future chapters and sort of notes to yourself as to when certain things need to happen, or, you know, kind of, oh, and now I actually do know how that the 6th chapter will end, and I can kind of go ahead and leave a note for myself. And that to me sort of means that the plan gets more comprehensive as you go. So from something that's maybe 2 or 3 pages long, you know, but by the end, that the plan is kind of much more detailed, and I think it saves you from ever having a completely empty page. Even if there's a few lines of dialogue, you know, that you know will happen in a scene, that kind of helps. It's like something to latch onto. So yeah, I think the plan gets more comprehensive as I go.
So it's not spoiling anything for anyone to say this book starts with, as you said, 15 years on with your end, but obviously that's a different end to how the book ends. And so as you were writing, even though, you know, you'd started 15 years on in the future, so that would be your end, did any of your plot change? Did you alter any of it? You know, did you have one thing in mind, but actually it's turned out in the book to be different?
Yeah, there were a few things that did change quite dramatically, and I think generally, rather than plot things, it was actually characters, maybe, who during the editing process really changed quite a bit. To give kind of people an idea, so I kind of edited Girl A with different people, so like with myself, and then with my agent, and then with the publisher for like over a year. So it's like by the end of it, like I never want to read this novel again fully. But I think like it's strange because sometimes editing, you feel like you're making minuscule changes at like a kind of like sentence level, you know, at a character level, and you know, it almost feels like, what am I doing? Like I'm spending hours on this and nothing's, am I making it better or worse? But I think that it's those kind of tiny incremental changes that actually over the course of the whole edit, they do change things hugely, and they change the whole tone of a particular character. And I would say that Delilah, of all the characters, is the one who changed most significantly. From a character who I think at first was actually, you know, looking back, was kind of very minimally drawn, and was kind of quite a simplistic, kind of simplistically kind of unpleasant and difficult character, to somebody who by the end of, you know, of kind of sending the book to the printers, I think she's the sort of character that I'm really proud of, and actually a character I really like, from someone I had very little time for when I first was kind of thinking about her.
That's so interesting. When I asked you, you know, who you were sort of drawn to, I actually wondered if you'd say Delilah, because she's so well characterized.
That's amazing. That makes me feel like all that the year was worth it as well. Thank you.
And I see you've joined us. Did you have
Yeah, no, if there's 1 or 2 questions popping up, do get your questions in. I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things you were just saying there, that the editing process was quite so long. That's extraordinary to be doing that with your editor, then what was your agent? So how long was the entire gestation period of getting the book from the initial idea to sort of publishing?
So I guess from the actual writing of the first draft took me about a year. So I had, you know, I had this kind of luxury of this 3 months off work. And in that time, I had this very grand delusion that I was going to finish my novel in 3 months, like no problem. Obviously, that didn't happen. So I got to the end of that 3 months, kind of about just under halfway through, and then I started work at Google, which is a much more kind of flexible legal job than I had previously had, and spent kind of another 9 months finishing writing the second half of Girl A. And so that from then it was kind of I think that was around the time that I kind of did my own edit after I'd finished the first draft. And then I worked on the manuscript with my agent for 4 months or so. So in kind of finding an agent, it was one of the things that I was really interested by was, did they think that the book was ready to go to publishers, or did they think that it needed a lot of work? And one of the reasons that I went with Juliet, who is my agent, was that she was very, very frank with me, and she kind of said, look, I think it's great. I think there's great elements to it, but we need to work on it for probably the full spring and summer as well. And I loved that because in my view, it was imperfect. And I think that it was just really, I kind of knew from that conversation that she would always be someone who had very frank criticism.
So did you have a number of agents who you'd been talking to and you chose her because of her frankness?
Yes. Yeah, that there were a few other agents who were interested, and she was the kind of one who had a really strong editorial idea and ideas for the book. There was there was another agent who was really, really interested, and who wanted me to basically make extensive changes, but said, and I'd want to look at the changes and then re-review it and see if I was sort of impressed enough to sign. And I felt a bit uncomfortable with that because it felt like I could kind of transform the novel and still potentially not end up with representation. So Juliet had the kind of great approach of I'll sign you, but you've got work to do. And that was a kind of good, I think that was, for me, was just kind of the perfect outcome.
Brilliant. I'm fascinated by that process and meeting authors and the route they took to getting published. So at the point where agents happy with it, were there a number of publishers who were then sniffing around and very interested in the book?
Yeah, that was kind of I think that was the sort of really of all the sort of moments of kind of through publication, I think that was the sort of the most sort of surreal and kind of wonderful moment was hearing that a number of publishers were interested, which was kind of way beyond anything that I had ever kind of hoped for, really. So I remember kind of that I was actually going away for work, and I went to India to do some work for Google. And just before I left, Juliet said to me, I'm going to send it out. We probably won't hear anything for 2 weeks. So just go focus on your work trip, and we can catch up when you're back. And I remember being in a taxi in rural India, where there was not much phone signal. And we were kind of on a 4-hour drive between different cities. And I got Juliet was trying to ring me. I could see it was her on the phone, but every time I answered, I just, I couldn't hear a word she was saying. It was just crackle. And I was oh gosh, this is going to be the most stressful 4-hour journey of my life. So yeah, it was when I kind of got to the next destination that I managed to get hold of her and hear that.
You must have thought, this is good news. For her to be contacting me now, it must be good news.
Yeah, no, I was really excited and very hopeful, because I think also generally people don't call with terrible news. Is that a silly cliche? Might kind of, I don't know.
Well, Julia had very wisely said 2 weeks, knowing that it would be quicker than that. I mean, obviously, the way publishers work, it's an arms race. They have to. And the thing is, when you get, someone like HarperCollins steps into the market, who you've gone with, they're always going to win a race of that size just because of their enormity. But were the offers then coming in one after another? Was that must have been a wonderful viewing.
Yeah, it was just very it was wonderful. And yeah, I don't kind of have, I don't even know if I have the words really, because I'd also been somebody who was very, very self-conscious about my writing, and but particularly when I was at university, I kind of had a very strong sense that I didn't really fit into kind of the creative writing scene there, and that I probably wasn't good enough, and that I was just sort of, not wasting my time, because I always loved doing it, but kind of, that it just probably was never going to happen for me. So I think sort of once I'd gotten over the sort of surprise that an agent could possibly sort of be interested, I think then having kind of different publishers sort of say that they loved the book it is amazing, and it's still like, every time I hear that a friend has read it and loved it, like it is kind of it's just fantastic. It really does kind of make your day and week and kind of year in a way.
Brilliant. Is the Abigail Dean sort of cutting room floor littered with a load of different true crime manuscripts, or was this the first one you really threw your heart into?
It was the first thing that I had really, really focused on for a long time. Yeah. There are lots of notebooks, definitely, that are full, particularly from when I was a kind of teenager. And there were a lot of there were a lot of kind of notebooks and character sketches from the last 10 years in a way, but they were probably more half-hearted. And one thing I did find really interesting was that the beginning of chapter 3 of Girl A is talks about one of the detectives who worked on the Gracie case, and that kind of extract was something I wrote when I was about 24. And so good 8 years ago now, and something that was written as part of a completely different story, that kind of character, but which sort of perfectly slotted into Girl A, and was kind of one of those luxuries where suddenly kind of 2,000-3,000 words has written itself because you did it kind of many years ago. So it's odd, because I feel like none of that stuff was ever wasted. It was either not to the extent of that literal inclusion in Girl A or in a future manuscript, but I think there was a lot of practice, and there was a lot of getting stuff kind of hideously wrong, and it's quite kind of nice to look back at those notebooks. I still enjoy reading aspects of them, even though nobody else ever will, and that's fine.
You're in a sort of true crime genre. Is this an area you're going to stay in forever? Is this the one you really love, or is there a will to go elsewhere as well?
I think there's a will sort of to go elsewhere potentially. I think I am definitely interested in true crime, and I think there are elements of the novel that I'm working on, or have been working on now for the last year, which has kind of roots in true crime. I definitely find sort of the events of the world just quite endlessly kind of interesting and fascinating, and the sort of human capacity for both good and terrible behavior to be something that I kind of always do find inspiration in that. So I think there'll often be things that are maybe rooted in real events that have taken place, and that are kind of different takes on them, and how they might have affected characters who are not necessarily the people you would think of when you think of a particular event. I think that will always be of interest, but I think maybe in kind of different ways than in Girl A.
That's a good question from Neil. How do you go about researching the plot lines? Did you interview any experts? I mean, have you got any friends who are kind of involved in the police forces, who you stumble on at dinner parties and corner them?
I maybe need more kind of police friends. I have one kind of family member who was a policeman, and I've not kind of I've not bothered him too much, I don't think. Maybe a little. Same with kind of friends who have medical background. I've probably bothered them a bit, but I'm trying to keep the relationships good for future novels. For Girl A, one thing that I really, really wanted to get right was that the characters' different reactions would be realistic. And would be that their kind of lasting effects of what had happened in the house would at least be possibilities of what somebody might of how someone might react. So there was a lot of psychological research, I would say, maybe more than research into the kind of crimes themselves. It was more kind of looking at responses like Stockholm syndrome and how that kind of might manifest itself. And one of the characters, Gabriel, suffers from rages, and how kind of physically the trauma that the children had gone through might manifest itself kind of many years later. So I think that was kind of, for me, the focus, and was really important in just ensuring that the characters felt genuine and felt like real human beings who had been affected in some way by what they've lived through.
I mean, there's so much. It's such a big book in terms of its content, and it's obviously going to be on the screen at some point. At what point did you hear there was interest from TV companies to make this?
It was relatively shortly after the publishing deals had kind of taken place. So yeah, kind of probably like a few months after they had kind of all been signed, and as we were sort of editing, as we were still editing the book. So yeah, I sort of heard that some of the production companies were interested, and I think that for me the sort of the most surreal moment was hearing that Johan Renck, who directed Chernobyl, for a start, had read Girl A. I mean, like, even the fact that he had read the manuscript was like very unexpected. So I think that hearing that he had kind of read it and loved it, and was kind of interested in being a part of it potentially, was, I think that was sort of the strangest moment in terms of the TV process, because I'm a really big TV addict. Okay. Often when I should be writing, I would usually like watch. I'm probably watching like TV. So any kind of limited series, particularly. So Chernobyl was, I thought, absolutely incredible. I loved Patrick Melrose. Loved Sharp Objects, the Gillian Flynn adaptation. So yeah, I think even the idea that Girl A could kind of be in that format is just kind of beyond anything, really.
Neil, just chip a question back in actually about: are you involved in the screenplay? Are you keen to keep control over the narrative?
So I'm only involved in a consulting kind of capacity. So I'd be like a producer, but a consulting one. And I'm not. I won't be writing the script. I'm gonna kind of leave it to people who have experience in writing for TV. And I think part of that is also just because I kind of want to focus on book 2, and I think that kind of on the writing and editing of that, which already looks like it's going to be quite an intense process. Yeah, I have a lot of faith in the team though, and if it is Johan Renck who is kind of directing that, I'm kind of like, okay, he's probably more experienced, only a bit than I am in TV. I've watched a lot though.
So, I mean, you've mentioned book 2. Is that going to be? Is there some link between book 1 and book 2? Or is this a complete standalone that you're working on now?
It is a total standalone, yeah. So nothing to do with the Gracies. I've kind of left them out in the world. So it's a book about conspiracy theories. and it follows two characters in the aftermath of an attack that takes place in a small town. And one of those characters loses her mother in this attack. And another character who is kind of based miles away believes that the whole thing is a hoax. It is a kind of conspiracy. And he sets out to disprove that the event and the people kind of who were involved in it ever existed. So it follows those two characters as they get closer to revenge or redemption.
Wow. And this one, I suspect, will be a much quicker kind of writing process to compared to the first book.
I don't know. It's so I kind of was working on it very, very early last year. So as Girl A was kind of going through edits, in the sort of in the weeks when I didn't have the manuscript, and those kind of fantastic weeks when you get to send it off back to somebody else, I was sort of started writing it then. So I've been writing it and kind of thinking about it for over a year now. I was writing this afternoon. So we've got about, I'm kind of in the pretty close to the end of the first draft now.
Exciting.
So yeah, that's kind of probably over a year already. And then I imagine it will probably be kind of a good chunk of editing time too. So maybe, I don't know, maybe nearly the same.
Wow. Something that I was fascinated about, it's a question that keeps jumping in and out of my head actually, is why was the book published when it was published? And there's obviously because of the subject matter and the it's a really heavy book. There must have been a debate at HarperCollins and with you about when to go live with this one. Was that one something you were involved in the discussion on?
I was kind of really aware that particularly, I think this time last year, there was a lot of talk about different books being postponed, I think, or being kind of pushed back to later in the year or to 2021. Yeah. And I think Girl A wasn't kind of part of those discussions because it in a way at that point, I vividly remember the idea that I'll probably be at home for maybe a month or two, and then the world will kind of adjust to normality. So I think Girl A kind of missed those discussions. And to be honest, by the time it was sort of discussed in sort of maybe late last year, I guess kind of middle, late last year, I think the verdict was that nobody knew how long this could go on for. And, in a way, people were still reading. And I think that was probably, in a way, meant that there wasn't loads of discussions because books were still doing pretty well. People kind of still wanted to escape, whether into a darker landscape at times, like the one in Girl A, or into something softer. So I don't think there was too much kind of debate as to whether to go ahead. And I think, if anything, there may have been discussion about the fact that it's maybe tougher if it's your debut novel and you're not able to get into bookshops and meet people and sort of say a thank you. But I think that, the HarperCollins team have done a pretty magnificent job in setting up events like the one you guys have set up. And I think that I was lucky in terms of Girl A did kind of have some great reviews and press attention.
You're in the hands of a great team. That's the thing. But the weirdness for you is the fact you've never experienced publishing a book in a normal environment. So publishing book 2 is going to be a revelation to you. But,
it'd be nice to have more of the kind of, maybe a bit more like wine and snacks. That would be a great addition to the whole process. So
totally. And I always insist certainly to have a little bit of a beer during all the events I do, which is a fair few actually. So I'm getting a bit of an alcohol habit actually in the process. Now the book is being sold. I mean, I think is it last count was it 27 countries or something? Is that the case, or is there more, or is it less?
Yeah, it's just over 30 now, which
Wow.
is crazy. Yeah, and there's been some deals kind of after publication, which has been amazing.
Wow. Are you close to being able to stop the Google job, do you think, or are you? That's incredible.
It's been, it's obviously, it's kind of been like an interesting question, and if I was still at a law firm, I mean, I would obviously never have kind of had the time to write, but I would have been pretty definitive in terms of like saying yes, like I'm kind of gonna give up this. It's not making me particularly happy. My job at present, I do genuinely really like. I have sort of a very understanding team, and I have sort of really kind of great clients and a lot of support. They've sort of been like, I'm doing like a Q&A internally next week so that they can ask me about Girl A and writing. So yeah, it's an environment that I really love, and I probably won't, unless I sort of have to, unless there's something comes to a head, give it up. I'm also of the belief that law and writing are not incompatible in many ways, in terms of that scrutiny of words and of language. I think is something that in law obviously is kind of incredibly important, because if you get that sentence wrong, like, a court will interpret that in a very specific way. And I think it's the same with readers. Like, every word and every sort of sentence, the way it lands has a slightly different impact and a different repercussion for different people. So I find them kind of a useful partnership at times as well, like to keep thinking about those words and the kind of full effect of them.
No, it's fascinating. It's lovely to have a job you love. I mean, at the point where perhaps things open up, which I suspect won't be until the autumn at the earliest, and you have to start commuting to work or something. Perhaps that'll would that have an impact or not? I don't know. Good. Now we've only got a couple of minutes left. Lucy, can I call on you to just give a little summary of how you feel about the book and how much you enjoyed it, and then I'll give a little sort of closing statement in terms of what we're going to be bringing in live events over the next few weeks.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it goes without saying. I could talk to you about this book all night. There is so many questions I'd love to ask, but as I said to you before, I can't, because it would give too much away. But it is a phenomenal book, and I couldn't put it down. And I'm gobsmacked. It's your first. I'm amazed, and I can't wait to read your next one. When is it due out?
It's still pretty uncertain at present, I think. So yeah, date to be confirmed, depending on all sorts of things. But yeah, hopefully, like, in the next like year or two, I think is like the sort of ballpark I have.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for being so honest with all your answers. It's been lovely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Abigail. It's been a wonderful hour. We've got Stacks, our bookshop. We've got Andrew Taylor and Miranda Marlins next week. Kazuo Ishiguro is coming up. We've got various kids events as well. Jill Mansell and Catherine Elliott. I'm reading from my phone, dare I say it. Nikki Smith, we're doing her book launch, and we're doing AJ News's book launch as well, 2 days on the trot. Mel Gildroych and Rachel Joyce doing an event together, which will be rather lovely. Rob Biddulph Kids event. Beth O'Leary, we're launching her next book, The Road Trip. And one to really look forward to, Elizabeth McNeil, Circus of Wonders. Many of you may have read Doll Factory, which was absolutely brilliant. But guys, thank you so much. Abigail, thank you very much for giving up your time and talking to us. And good luck with keeping the book going. You've virtually finished the first draft. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's a good feeling. It'd be even better when I've written the end, which I'm going to do this time, because I forgot to do that for Girl A, and I think it's pretty defining.
I'm going to squeeze in a quick question. Has your agent seen any of the draft so far?
She has seen the first 20,000 words. Yeah.
Good. Happy? Good.
Relatively, yeah. I mean, there's always great feedback. So relatively to me is a good answer.
Brilliant. So listen, thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Abigail, and massive thanks to Lucy as well. And yeah, no regime. Just I'm going to click the end button. So thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.